videotaping of these meetings here that happen in this room, separate from the security cameras, because they have actually two different purposes, which means that changes a little bit about what your committee is doing there with, this part of it. Nothing to do with security, but for the taping, for live streaming / recording for future people reference of the events in this room. So, Chief, have you had any update on the part that you were working on here for the last couple of months with just the security itself, security cameras and locks?
This isn't on the agenda.
That's something you can
Where
comment
are
on?
Mr. Chairman, last week Friday, Supervisor Reyes and I got together and we walked through the building. During that time, I let her know that I let her know what the needs were of our town hall and our building across the way. At no time since this started, I'm not saying this is right, said to her, but at no time since this started was I told to look into this part of it. Zoom things for this. This was strictly my bailiwick for looking at the town hall property, security cameras, and key cards.
Yeah. All right, so that part, you haven't really, you haven't engaged that part of it within your process at all.
Correct.
And so that part, as far as the live stream and the video recording of meetings occurring in this room, that would then become part of your recommendations on what vendor to use there. But you're not necessarily using the same vendor that he is, or you haven't even looked at that?
That is the focus of our meeting tomorrow night.
Okay, so that's gonna be one of the discussions, okay.
And the three bids that I received earlier, I did share with Supervisor Reyes and she has those.
Okay, so you're gonna look at those too?
Well, and that's what I commented last month, that they were not really apples for apples comparison, and that's when, Chief Jensen explained to me on Friday that he told each of the bidders the same thing, but they interpreted it differently and chose to quote differently. And I guess I wasn't clear in some of our meetings on the Whitlows if we had already approved to move forward with some of
The
that.
only thing we approved before was the keys.
The split rows, but they work directly with access control, so they do the installation at the same time, and the bid for access control is never approved by the board.
That was my question.
And if I may interject, Whitlow is the company that works in conjunction with Central One. Right, so by having Whitlow, that means we would also employ Central One to make the system as a whole.
And that's all security.
Correct.
Okay.
Because the security needs in the IT infrastructure are totally different than the needs for the Zoom meetings, the communications aspect for the social media and internet line coming in, because we're gonna bog down our line and it's gonna make things slow for us.
But it doesn't mean they can't still do that.
Exactly, some of our committee members,
If we're already doing work here, maybe we'll get a little break on the, on this part of it too, but they can still be used, right, for this part of it. Zoning, they're totally separate.
Well, as far as you say the
saying
same,
the same
the
contract.
same contract,
Contractor,
but
but
we
the same,
separate.
even though you're separate, it doesn't mean they can't do this part also, is what I'm asking. You know what I'm saying?
The cameras used for security,
He's not talking about the cameras, he's
I'm not
talking
talking-
about the contract.
You're saying you need totally separate from
oh,
this.
yes, the contractors
Yes,
could be
but
the same.
contractors can do the same work for this, possibly for this end of it also. is what I'm
Yes,
saying.
if they do that, but I'm not aware if they do that or not.
Okay,
I apologize if you understand.
That's okay.
all right, so that's the security part. The other improvements, and I'm gonna pass something on here to Jim. I do have the contracts now for the bathrooms, and I reviewed the contracts, I made some notes for you. You already were authorized to check and change these, you had a lot of changes. So I'd like Jim to, before I sign this, to actually back check on the changes he requested that actually occurred. I think they all did, but you had to direct contact with them. That's one thing, and the other thing, they had substantial completion listed as October 29th. Well, by the time we get, you know, our first meeting here and see when they're gonna give us a schedule, I think it'd be pretty hard for them to meet that, you know, but, they delayed a full month getting these contracts to us, you know, so that's the, you know. So that's the bathroom stuff. And then how we were saying how that, corresponds to the carpeting, I don't know if we have a separate, item for that, do we?
Yeah, 10 new business.
Oh, that's in the new business? Okay.
Wherever you want.
Okay, well, let's say the coordination between those two, since we're replacing the carpeting in front of the bathrooms, we wanna do that after the bathrooms are done. So, yes, I mean, you know, we can discuss the whole contract, or the pricing we need to, but it's gonna probably be after the bathrooms. And that could start, you know, the earliest it could start would probably be mid-September based on turn around those contracts, we have a meeting, they provide a schedule, and then we approve the schedule. So,
We don't really know, okay, we know the start date, but we don't really do the end date.
we don't have one, we have an end date, but we don't have a start date, and I'm thinking that due to the delays in getting this approved, that October 29th might be undoable. Yeah. But it's sure, and, you know, yeah, they're busy, but they have a lot of resources, so it could take that long, so the carpeting will occur after the bathroom. And I do believe everything else on this list is done, we talked about security, basement wall is done. Somewhere along the line, we have to pull the trigger here on having, some quotes come in for our furnace and AC. Our last repair, Kaylin, was $800 just to get us our air conditioning.
770.
Yeah, just to get our air conditioning back. And the last two times that they fixed our HVAC, they said, I don't know if next time we're gonna be able to fix it. We've been kind of dancing here a little bit. We do have it in the budget to do it. I think maybe next month, we should, have the DPW guys, contact 3 HVAC guys and get prices for the, I think we have 2 separate.
I know.
Yeah, we'll get a bunch of quotes for that. So that one we haven't really did anything on, as well as the salt shed roof. We know that's, you know, got a limited life left. Greg was gonna get a couple quotes on that, but then he's kind of tied up with some stuff right now. But everything else, we're looking pretty good. And
I
by the
did
way,
notice that we do not have a light on our flag, which I believe is
A spotlight?
required. Yes.
it's not like,
There's a flight, there's a.
Or a downward one off the top of the pole.
Why? I did not see that.
not on the flag,
When we were here late at night, I did not see any light on the flag in front of
do we leave it
us.
up, do we leave the flag up around the clock? Or no?
Yes.
Yes, sir, it's up 24/7, and it's my understanding there, I know there hasn't been a light since 2017.
Okay.
But there should be, right?
Yeah, if it's out at night,
Yeah,
it should be.
when we leave the flag, it should be lit.
I'm gonna put that on the list.
You always get a spotlight on the ground.
Yeah, yeah. I know they like some of the front of it over there, Christmas time, that's what they forget. Okay, I do believe that's it for,
Well, with that,
You could
if
probably
we
do that.
approve Whitlow's, do we need to try and approve the other one, see if they'll still
The
hold that
central,
quote?
the
Yeah, the
central
central.
one, yeah.
okay, we still have the issue though of Central Security, you know, that's the price I have listed in my spreadsheet. You had another 2 companies or one other company?
There were 2 other companies.
Okay, is there any way to make these guys do apples to apples is the question, because we'd like to get that one going too, security.
I think the chief would like to, eliminate one consideration based on the feedback he got from the village, who also used that
Yeah, that one was,
sector.
they had a very bad experience there.
And the other one, I think, was very late in their responses, not responsive when being contacted, causing some concern for their reactiveness.
Just listed under security.
The ones that, are not Central One Security, are they higher than the 6720 and the 4745, are they higher?
They're lower.
They're lower, but there's things that they don't list that Central One does.
Correct.
Okay, so how do we get off dead center on this one, then I guess is the question. Have them come in here and say, hey, I mean,
I think we should probably reach out to Central One and get nothing confirmed as to honor the bid, because it is February.
it's at least a half a year, you know.
Materials alone could be, I mean, theirs on, or even get equipment, it'd be crazy.
So maybe we need to put it on the agenda for next time to have final bids.
Yeah, next month.
And any approval should be specified, that we're going to be approving bids or awarding contracts.
Cause those,
It says all items are up for discussion, consideration, deliberation, and possible for an formal action.
Thank you, I still think it should be more specific.
and we don't like the numbers that we see right now either, so,
I remember the number we got from Central One.
Central.
I believe that they gave us they gave us everything that we asked for. The only difference is that the other two didn't give us the same thing that we asked for, that's why there's such a disparity, you know. But I don't like dealing with companies that say, we'll give you this amount, and then you sign a contract, you start to work, and then you say, well, we have to add this, we have to add that. That's not the way to do it, it should be, this is what you're getting, this is what you're paying.
Well, the guy that was here when the three of us walked all over the whole campus here,
That's
The other
that's
company?
Central One,
that was Central One, did any other companies come and walk through with you also?
yes,
And
they
you
did,
told them the same thing, and yet they didn't provide it? Okay.
correct.
Alright. Alright, I'd like to meet with you on that later this week to go over that.
All right.
I'll talk to you to see what you found out, cause we do have to get that off dead center. We thought security was a, top level here, so. Okay, alright, that takes care of those, okay. And then Greg, we asked him to provide a sketch on potential improvements at the boat launch, like a staging pier, in order to allow, when people are launching to, get off the pier, the active pier, and not get all bogged down, and he got, quote from Complete Piers for 19,043.40. That's what he's recommending, he says his choice.
That's the permanent.
Yeah. Yeah, and the one with a little, I guess, more of a, we call it temper, one is 11,000. Two questions, one, how is our boat launch fund looking for capital improvements, number one, and then number two, Barb had some discussions with the DNR and grants. What kind of numbers are we?
We maybe have $2,500, maybe.
2,500?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to come up with a number on this budgeting program and where we get that from, number one. And the grants that you talked to?
I've been working with Jim Jackley, and right now the, young lady who's, I don't know if she's young, I'm gonna call her young. The woman who's in charge of the, access grants for the boat launch is on vacation, so I don't have direct contact with her. Jim and I started working on this last week, and he said that there are some 50/50 grants that he was aware of. And he thought that there was one other program that he's been researching or trying to find for me. But the person who has the best knowledge of these grants is, not in the office this week, so.
And the other thing we probably ask Greg to do, or his designate, is to get another quote here. Complete Piers obviously does a lot of work on the lake, so I'm sure they're familiar with here, but this is only one quote here. He didn't really like the other ones, but I think we want to see it.
Who's the owner of Complete Piers?
That's the,
Church.
Ryan
Nichols.
Nichols.
Ryan
Ryan
Nichols.
Nichols.
yeah.
Oh, so it changed
He bought it.
his father?
Yeah, he
Why-
bought
changed the name?
He bought the business.
Oh, yeah, I just knew that.
So that's Nicholson. He had another one, and I think we wanna see that, number one. Number two, we know, even if we go ahead on this sometime later this year, it's gonna be put in next spring. That's what'll happen.
They like to do it in the winter time if possible. I know they like to do it in the winter because they can auger and pound right on the ice. I know Rick said that at his last meeting too.
Yeah, so, next month, put it on there again, and I'll ask Greg to get another number here.
I'll continue to work with Jim and Sarah to nail down a possible grant, cause I'd like to see if we can't get more money from some other source.
Yeah, what I failed to mention at the last part here, when we talk about town hall improvements, it's 95% sure that we can do the bathroom improvements on ARPA funds, okay? Because the improvements are definitely COVID-related, or touchless everything, and whatever, as well as, we can do what we have there, safe, so that would help on that other budget, that we're dealing with, town hall improvements, is pretty inclusive. But we just already identified another one here, but, with light, that's a good point.
Mr. Chairman, can I give my 2 cents about the pier?
Yep.
Greg and I talked about it quite a bit. And I would personally, from an administrative standpoint and from a maintenance standpoint, like to see a permanent pier. Because if we put in a temporary pier, we have to pay $450 to put it in, $450 to take it out.
Yeah.
So each year you're spending $900 at today's rate, and we don't know what that may go up to in the future. So fiscally, being fiscally responsible, yes, it's a little more in the front end, but in the long end, it's gonna be well worth it.
That was gonna be my comment also.
Absolutely.
Not even worry about wood and
Yep.
for the temporaries. It's gonna cost a lot of money in the long run.
Okay, so that's gonna be further, discussion on that. Okay, status on compost site and Lake Beulah weed disposal. This might tie in a little bit with Greg's report in that, but, we had a lot of discussion since July 4th, I believe, about this. I think this was a complaint to the DNR about the Potter's Lake, weeds going to, Greg, Smallhouse is farm, 40 acres on Stone School Road. And as it turns out on that, the question that he had was that, well, we need a composting license there, and the DNR says, no, it's land spread, and he actually stated what the, DNR regulation is on that.
NR 518.04 sub-7.
Okay, so that takes care of that part, the town doesn't have to give any solid waste permit for land disposal of lake weeds, because both management districts have to work directly with the DNR for their aquatic weed, collection, harvesting plan. And they have to get that, permit with the DNR, and on that permit, it says where you're taking the stuff. And they also approve that. Okay, so we're kinda out of that unless, something happens here, nuisance wise, and that's, of course, something that we'll probably hear about. As far as our landfill, old landfill, which is now our compost site, John Murphy is out here, right?
No, he's not.
Yeah.
We need it to be North Christian.
Yeah, John,
This is his report.
yeah, I think I can show you that, I want to find my original copy. I tasked him with the, yeah, like I said, I have so many files and I'm looking up. Here it is. So John, made calls to the same DNR people we were talking to, because, that compost site by the airport, the 40 acres, has been operating as a compost site before there was any permit requirements, period. So the DNR lady says, well, there's a permit now that's required, and you should probably get it. They didn't say they had to get it, but I think we should.
I was gonna say, technically I was grandfathered in then.
We are, but I guess the optics of it is if we're actually running one. You know, the DNR did an inspection in 1994, and on the report, they said, we're setting up the next inspection for, a year from that. So the last one that we had, September 23rd, 1994, it said, no follow-up required, everything's good, schedule next inspection for 1995. So I asked the DNR, I would like to see all the inspection reports ever since we've been operating there. And they said it's not on their electronic database, but they do have paper files, and she would get to it. I wanna see that, because I wanna know if they were doing this every year. And Greg said, it was more than once, it was several times, but he didn't know how many times. If that's the case, the form itself has a facility license number and ID number, if it's blank, and the report we got, okay. Let's say, for instance, in 2000, that they do a report and say, oh, by the way, there's now, a facility license needed. I like more than that, we all want to know that, So I've asked for that, but John, if you read John's, report here, there's two things that are very important. One of them is, that his recommendation is, let's go ahead and apply for that license on that form 4400-188, which is in the copy. Costs $550, but it's a one-time deal. You don't charge it every year or whatever you need or whatever you expect. It's a one-time deal. But if that site takes lake weeds, okay, that changes the 20,000 cubic yard site capacity to 5,000. Why should we do that? That would be bad for us, and cut our capacity by 75%. Not to mention, there's an additional license needed if that's the case. And I don't think if the town even applied for that license, we would get it. It's a half a mile from the quarter mile, not a half mile from the quarter. Okay,
The site, the amount is like cubic yards.
Yes. That's all they.
I thought it was weight, it was a mistake on the yardage, it was more weight.
Metric tons. That was specifically for
Those
those.
lake, once they water this, they when they're like, nothing.
That was for the, hall and,
Whether or not the trucks needed, trucks needed
All
the
of a sudden
second
it just
license.
shrinks down and then it comes to, who's gonna?
Okay, well, the bottom line is, he looked at this, he's a recycling guy, and he did a bunch of research, and he said, as a member of the Town East River Recycling Committee, I'm also not in favor of adding lake weeds to the compost site. I do support updating, the Town East River composting license. So, I think, I kind of agree here, I know it's $550, but yes, it's grandfathered in, but why leave the door open for anybody to say there's not a license at that facility, it stopped taking waste in 1974, and then in 1994, when they finally closed it, they had all the laundering wells because of the pollution, right, okay, from the old dump, okay, and then it immediately became a compost site, and I'm thinking that the inspection that was done in 94 had to be near the beginning of that operation as a compost site. We haven't found the actual data of that, to be true, but we do have an inspection saying it was operating before. So, okay, I think we need a motion to go ahead and apply for the, solid waste facility initial license application form, application submitted. So,
I'll make the motion that the town of East Troy apply for the solid waste facility initial license application form 4400-088.
Motion to send in a license application, do we have a second? Peter, second, discussion? On the motion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None. And follow up with that, as far as Lake Beulah, I did have a discussion with the people in the management district, because remember last month, we gave them, I think we call it a pilot project. They go out there 1 week, put it there, and see if it becomes a problem. And I believe your motion also said we want to mix it in with the leaves and the other yard waste, so it's not by itself, okay?
The comment was, does it need to be, in order to be composted properly, than just weeds, yeah. And then who is gonna pay for that?
Yeah, and actually, that would be the operation that Greg does, when he turns the pile every 2 weeks, you know? Yeah, in my discussion, they said, okay, have any weeds from Lake Beulah went to that compost site yet? No. And is there any plan to? No. Will there ever be a reason in the future? Well, maybe, but in most cases, there's a high demand for that stuff, for fertilizer, you know? So, what I got from, who did I talk to? I talked to Stu Alder. Stu Alder, he's the guy that's in charge of the cutting disposals. And he said, no, we don't need to take it there, we're not going to. So the only question we have in front of us here now, knowing after researching that, you know, it probably wouldn't happen in the future, and we're talking about allowing a demo project, whether or not we keep that in place, to try it, or rescind that, approval we gave last month. And that's really our decision, what we think we should do. You know.
Well, I mean, we bring lake weeds there, according to this email, it's gonna cut us 75% of that, right?
If we get the other permit, which is correct.
Right,
So in the future,
do we wanna cut our capacity by 75% or not?
no.
I don't know that it's
Yeah.
much of a
Yeah.
discussion or concern.
Right, for going forward, but we have a permit now for a demonstration pilot project to do 1 week. Question is, do we wanna keep that in place just to see if it would be an issue? It really doesn't make a difference, because if we get a permit, it's not gonna allow it, unless we get the secondary license, which we won't.
One of the issues that Mr. Zest brought up was, the fact that the invasive plants, milfoil.
Eurasian water mill.
Right, if that were to be deposited there, there was a concern about maybe, waterfowl or birds transporting it to other areas, and I think that might be something the board needs to consider.
I talked to Laurie Millsop from the DNR, she says what they attempt to do is to get the weeds as far away from the lake as possible, and that particular site is like 1.5 miles. It ain't gonna happen, I mean, I really can't see that, but the DNR again is in charge of that, okay? They know what weeds are being cut, because actually it's in the management plan, you know, why you're doing weed control, you know? Right, yeah. So, again, the question is, I mean, we say we wanna go ahead and, you know, get a license, you know, for the site, we're gonna do that. We know we're not gonna go forward with the one that would allow, you know, the lake weeds in there, okay? And by the way, I don't know how long this has been going on, 30, 40 years? I don't know.
25 plus, but Potter's Lake is been there ever since my father was, I feel like it's got that down over there, 75. That lake was like, had such a inundation, that's not a problem, covered the lake like a matted carpet, you couldn't even run a boat across it. Couldn't. So he formulated that lake district, or was part of it anyway, and, they purchased, the harvester from Aqua Marine, so that was, I remember, it was 1975 or 76.
So 46 years ago, so that's the reason why I bring that up, is this has been going on for, you know, 40 to 50 years, and it's never been an issue, ever. And this year, all of a sudden, there was all sorts of issues, but what's changed? Nothing's changed, it's going to the same places.
I thought the issue of, the management district needing, approval for a 1-week trial basis was moot because they weren't going to be doing it.
Well, that's,
There's two different ones, there's Beulah and Potter.
Oh, I see, okay.
yeah, and Beulah, that was the 1-week permission deal, you know, and-
Potter's is the one next to us.
Yes, that's the one down there. And again, kind of separate issues here, but like I said, the only question is, and oh, by the way, the reason that the request came is one of the sites, was the orchard, I believe, that you had to stop taking it, or for a while stop taking it.
Sure, but we, truck it to a farm, hours.
Right, but earlier this spring, there was one that notified you they needed it this year, orchard or something.
I'm not sure which
Okay.
section it was.
Right, so the question here is, we wanna rescind last month's action for that
I think we
William
should.
Pilot project. You think so?
Well, if we're filling out this application.
Yeah, we're gonna do the application and it won't be allowed next year.
So, it seems to a new point, I mean, it seems like work that doesn't need to be done. And, you know, problems could arise from it, and why not cut it off before we have problems that we have to backtrack and deal with.
Okay. It makes sense to you too, cause you've been studying this too, I know.
Well, I don't know, I mean, I just question when the measuring of the capacity of those weeds. You know, the 20 cubic yards, you know, and the 5, you know, could compromise our compost site, it's like, how are these being not measured weeds like that? It just seems like, you know, you get a big ball and then
Yeah, well,
spread out.
it's what leaves the lake, and how full the truck is, how big the truck is, and cubic yards, the same thing, but once the water drains out, and it dries out, it's.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, please.
For a number of years, I received all the, aquatic plants from Lake Lula on my farm. And, it was great, I mean, it's great count, it settles down to almost nothing. After a few years, it's almost all gone. Never any odor or anything like that, but I would say as far as the management district, could you wait, until that message gets back to the management district about the trial, because I assumed we were going ahead of it, I didn't know it was gonna be rescinded. And Stu would not be the ultimate voice on that.
No.
And, the amount of, weeds is really minor, and I think they, pull out around 200 to 300 cubic yards a year, that's all. And that goes down to nothing. So its effect on the compost pile would be pretty minimal. But give us another session to check it out with the, authority in the, management district.
Right.
And
I
that
can
would
talk,
be,
I talked to Stu and Dave, but you're right, your board has not even discussed
we
it.
never heard about it yet.
Okay, to put that on next month. I mean, I was told it ain't going there anyway.
We're doing it.
I mean, it's not going there. So,
Yeah, I guess if we can have a handshake that we're not gonna start it before we have next month's meeting, we just don't wanna get in any liability with Coleman's contract, that's our point, right, for our board?
yep,
I mean, I'm fine with waiting until next month, as long as nobody's gonna do anything with it, but if we're trying to get,
Because when did
we're making
we
it legit.
allow it? We allowed it in
Last month.
June or July?
It was more than a month, it was
That
2
was
months
in
ago,
June.
wasn't it?
June.
2 months ago, I think, it was 2 months, 2 meetings ago.
at first it was May, and they said we're not coming until June.
June
and-
meeting, it was approved on trial basis.
June, okay, so
Well,
that
it's
is 2
been 2
months.
months and they haven't done it,
No.
Well, I was told it's not gonna happen, you got plenty of sites to go to, that's what I was told.
I guess it doesn't matter to make a decision tonight or next month, if you guys wanna take, to
If
approve it.
it's no harm to the
We're not
town,
gonna
I
allow
would
it, yeah, we're not gonna,
A
it
month
sounds like
later.
we're not gonna do it.
It's not gonna happen,
So,
actually, you know that.
what's the difference if we do it now or next month?
Okay, put it on next month's agenda.
But we were in dire position for
Sure,
a place to put it, so I'm surprised,
that's why we approved the trial run.
well, you were at the meeting, I think you heard it, yeah.
On the same issue, I received an email directly from Mr. Zess wanting my opinion on whether or not the solid waste ordinance, chapter 8, applies to aquatic plant waste. And I responded that I would need authorization from the board to review any ordinance to render an opinion like that.
Okay,
So I don't know if the board wants to
Okay,
do that or
Even
not.
if they do it, why would you even have?
Was he talking about even land use?
Anywhere.
Anywhere he's asking about, right? The solid waste, he's not asking just at the,
He just asked, I believe the solid waste ordinance, chapter 8, applies to aquatic plant waste.
and,
That was the question.
okay, and Lori Molsoff from the DNR said, no, it's not, you know, doesn't need a compost license, and it's not, doesn't need a solid waste license. The question is whether or not our solid waste ordinance would require a license or a permit for that. If that's the case, that means anybody that applies manure on a farm that's not from their farm would need a town permit for solid waste? I don't think so, you know.
I don't know if the ordinance speaks to aquatic plant waste. I thought it's more geared toward,
Refuse.
commercial
Yeah, I-
garbage haulers, but I don't know.
Yeah, I,
Look at that.
It's a gray area.
yeah, you know, probably will too. But the question would then come back to, you know, what is the material? And that's the one where the DNR said source separated compostable material does not need to be disposed of at a composting site. In this case, the material may be land spread as per NR 51804 sub 7. That tells me that it's not refuse, not garbage, it's not demolition.
How is
material.
solid waste defined, I guess is the question.
That would
We
be,
need exceptions then, if we don't have it.
that would be research on your part to see if our solid waste ordinance would require, that's probably a question he's got for you.
And
Well,
that's
Yeah,
what
he's
we
asked-
need to authorize Jim to do.
Yeah, we're gonna have a
I
notice, so we have to
understand.
put that on next month if you want to authorize him to look at that. In our solid waste, ordinance, it's not that big, it's like 8 pages or whatever. It does define, you know, waste, but we're gonna find out when you read that, that it's probably still gray on where aquatic plants fall. But to me, it goes back to where the DNR allows it, and by their definition, it's not waste, it's
Okay.
fertilizer. It's
Well,
fine,
if you want to give me that authorization, make sure it goes on next month.
yeah,
You
actually,
don't think it would fit under the agenda item that we're on right now?
I think it could.
I would think so too. Says Lake Beulah weed disposal, I guess it would, which would be the same as Potter's Lake weed disposal.
well,
No,
generally,
It's not an issue, because we're not gonna allow them to take it to the compost.
I think they're just
Oh,
talking
he's
about
talking
dumping
about
on
it.
farms.
you got a separate question on whether or not our town ordinance would require a separate permit. It's our chapter 865,
The town ordinance wouldn't.
town solid waste disposal.
Yeah, but we don't require
Yeah,
permits for that.
I got a question for Jim. So, when it comes to, well, however the DNR defines, solid waste, I mean, aquatic waste, so if it falls under the definition of solid waste or not, it doesn't sound like it does, right? Separated source material or.
I don't know if she answered that question.
So,
in the
the point is
email
that,
that I
and we can't create an ordinance that's more stringent than the DNR, can we? Cause that's what we would be doing. I mean, we.
Well, no, I think what would have to happen is, if in our solid waste ordinance, the definition does not exclude,
Aquatic plant.
right, it is a gray area that I think probably needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it's a 6-page deal, it's called town solid waste
It
disposal.
simply might be that accepted from the definitions are the DNR or definition of aquatic plant. It might be something that simple.
The one exception